Hello and welcome back to UK Column Interviews. Now today I've been having a lot of chats with our good friend Ben Rubin on the phone, and we brainstorm and we put the worlds to rights and we deep dive basically on the phone, and we thought this is crazy. We need to talk about this and let our audience in on our conversations. So this isn't really going to be an interview. It's going to be one of Ben and I's chats about the future of Britain. So in our last chat, we talked about Tony Blair's vision of future Britain, the extraordinary conference that both Ben and I witnessed. We watched it, hours of it. But since then, Ben has been really deep diving into behind the scenes, because the stage is set. Tony Blair is on the stage, but what's in the wings? What's behind the scenes? And Ben has discovered some incredible findings. And we've already introduced our audience to an organisation called Anthropy, and we'll be talking more about Anthropy, hidden in plain sight. But really, are we witnessing a network of almost a World Economic Forum rebrand in the UK? Are we witnessing the Eden Project, very close to where I live, as being the UK Davos? And I know Brian Gerrish, my colleague, has a lot to say with regards to similarities with Common Purpose. So without further ado, I want to welcome back our friend and expert, Ben Rubin. Ben, welcome. Please give us a little short introduction to yourself and then tell me, do we have a UK WEF within our midst?
Thanks, Debbie. It's always a pleasure to be here at UK Column. And to give a little bit of background, I spent 17, 18 years in business, in the consulting industry, working with leaders of companies and also some government departments as well, helping them to digitize primarily and to deploy new technologies and transform themselves in order to do that. About 3 years ago, I realized that the natural end point for a lot of the stuff that we'd been building was not good for humanity. And that actually the sum total of all of the technologies that we'd been building, although we had good intentions and there are some positives and some good things that can be technologies, actually the people specifying the system did not have humanity's best interests in mind at a fundamental level. And actually, where all this stuff goes to is something a bit like a global slave system that they've specified in a building and are desperately trying to complete and fully implement right now. And one of the most well-known explanations of this is the World Economic Forum's Great Reset. Well, the Great Reset was written by Klaus Schwab, who was the founder of the World Economic Forum, whose tentacles extend across the whole of the British state and every other international government and all the global corporations and the big consulting firms and the financial system and pharmaceutical industry and anywhere else that you can. And the World Economic Forum meet in Davos in January every year. But they do have informally, but I think it is difficult to question that this is the case. They do have national events, national groups who represent their interests, and I think that's exactly what Anthropy is. And we're going to talk a bit about Anthropy today, which is this event that's coming up in the start of November at the Eden Project, which Debbie's already mentioned this week on UK Column News. And we can talk a little bit about what they're doing there and who's attending. I'm also going to mention another event which is coming up called CogX, which is related to what's happening at Anthropy, but is more representative of what I call the which is this insane rush to artificial intelligence, everything, basically. That seems to be what they're pushing towards. But there's quite a bit of crossover in terms of the attendees, and the agenda is absolutely the same. And then we're going to get into, assuming we have time, because there's a lot here, and we're really just going to skim across the surface. We're going to talk a bit more about Tony Blair and his relationship into all of this, and particularly as that relates to Tony Blair's friend and collaborator, Mehdi Koban, his organisation, My Life, My Say, and how that links into the advanced tech ecosystem here in the UK. And there is an ecosystem here. This is a conspiracy in plain view, for my money. There's no other way to describe it. So should we start with Anthropy, Debbie? Is that a good place to go?
Let's start with Anthropy, Ben, because when you sent me the link to Anthropy and I clicked into it and I saw that it was at the Eden Project, which is literally 2 minutes up the road from me, I was pretty shocked, because people don't expect Cornwall, right in the southwest tip of England, to be hosting so many events. And yet the Eden Project was also used for G7 in 2021, when Boris Johnson, all the political global leaders and the royal family all converged at Eden. And there's some pretty interesting symbology at Eden too. And I don't know if we're going to get time to go into that. But, you know, Anthropy is an organization that says you've never been to a gathering like this before. Leave your egos at the door. And with it being at Eden, I thought I would try to register. They want to know pretty much everything about you and a little bit more besides. And I'm not sure that they would have accepted me. However, in their charter and in their agenda, because they've got a huge website, one of their agendas is the future of Britain, which looks remarkably like the Tony Blair conference, The Future of Britain, that we attended. Now, their sponsorship, I mean, you go into it and you look at KPMG, obviously the Eden Project, Omnicom, which Brian Gerrish, my colleague, has a lot to say about, Severn Trent Water, Coots, big names, big sponsors. Ben, let's just talk about a few of the speakers, a few of the names that we highlighted on UK Column that you noted particularly, that were, say, names of concern or names of interest, shall we say?
Absolutely. So, I mean, they're all actually interesting. It's the thing with these events. I've just been looking through the speaker list this morning, and you can go down a very deep rabbit hole on pretty much every individual on the page. The ones that really jump out at me, and the reason why I think Anthropy exists, by the way, I believe that Anthropy is where globalism really meets the British establishment. And I believe it's the second year. It's not been going on for that long. And I remember following it last year because actually some people that I know were attending it. And EY, my former employer, one of the sponsors, and there's a lady called Alison Kay, who is one of the senior partners at EY in the UK, who is attending and speaking at the conference. I know a few other people who were there last year as well. And last year, as I recall it, it was much more explicit that this was a Davos-style event for the UK. And I think they actually described it as such. This year, they're not doing that. I think for obvious reasons, which is to say that they've been rumbled and they can't be quite so blatant now. But the attendees are from across industry, and particularly these non-governmental organizations that sit between everything and are like the connective tissue between the different parts of the establishment. And two people of particular note that jumped out at me. The first one is this lady, Dame Julia Cleverdon, who I'd never heard of before. And she is the former chief executive of Business in the Community. Business in the Community does what it says on the tin. It's a way for large, generally listed companies to invest in and back community initiatives. And she was the CEO. She's now vice patron. She's also formerly the chair and now vice patron of Teach First, which is about bringing high-performing graduates into teaching for, I think they do 3 years, and then they go off into industry. It's a way of getting kind of top grads into the teaching, into education, and before they go off and do other things. And she was also formerly chair and is now vice patron of the National Literacy Trust. Now, as I understand it, these are the patron for each of those organisations is actually the Crown. These are royal royal charities. So, as vice patron to each of those organisations, Dame Julia Cleverden is essentially acting on behalf of the king. That's my reading of it. So when I say this is where globalism meets the British establishment, I think that she's an exceptional example of that. Yeah, she's basically acting for the royal family. They aren't in attendance, but people like Julia Cleverden are in attendance. Interesting. The second one that I think is particularly worth talking about is Andy Haldane, who is currently the Chief Executive of the Royal Society for the Encouragement of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce, aka the RSA. He's been there for about 3 years, I believe, 3 or 4 years, and before that, he was chief economist to the Bank of England. And the RSA is basically, it's like a honey trap for smart, bright young things coming to London. They want to get connected to the latest thinking, people who've got good networks, kind of get on the inside of the machine. They head to the RSA, and they have outposts around the country, and they have connections into the top levels of, well, everywhere, actually. And the key thing to note about the RSA is the first letter in the RSA, the R, which means royal. So again, Andy Haldane there, essentially representing the interests of the British royal family. And let's remind ourselves that Charles was actually I hesitate to call him the king. I'm a Republican, just for the record. But anyway, Charles was one of the lead out people for the announcement of the Great Reset. He jointly announced the plan alongside Klaus Schwab in November 2020. So this is all completely aligned to that agenda, and for my money, these are the people helping to implement that plan across the country. Few other people in there. So another Dame. Yeah, it's quite a vaunted collection of people here. Dame Julia Slingo, OBE, who is an advisor to the UN. She's a meteorologist and climate scientist. So when the UN says that it owns the science around climate, which it has been saying, and it's been working with people like Google to censor what it describes as climate misinformation, just like they were silencing vaccine disinformation during the pandemic, these are the types of people that they send to do that. Again, deeply embedded into the British establishment. Another person of interest, this one was quite entertaining because I went to school with his sons, is Lord Deben, aka Lord Gummer, who's currently the chairman of the Climate Change Committee, former Tory grandee. And I suppose he still is a Tory grandee, actually, isn't he? Much less active in frontline politics, but certainly doing big and important things behind the scenes, given climate change is one of the top 2 or 3 issues that we're being talked to about on a consistent basis. So his presence is certainly of interest as well. And then you get into the big consulting firms. Yeah. So these sort of British state representatives are one thing. But the big consulting firms, as I've talked about quite a lot on my own blog, riseuk.substack.com, are all strategic partners of the World Economic Forum. And we have Alison Kay, who's one of the senior partners, not exactly sure if she runs a part of the UK or exactly what her role is at the minute, but she's one of the top people at EY in the UK. She's attending. And she'll no doubt be talking about how they can implement the globalist agenda more rapidly and emphatically, because that's what all of these people are pushing towards. And she personally, as a partner in EY, has been funding and shaping the World Economic Forum agenda for a number of years now, as has Bina Mehta, who's the UK chair of KPMG, same gig basically. They are a strategic partner of the World Economic Forum. And between these big consulting firms, they basically advise all the FTSE 100, FTSE 250 companies, large swathes of private enterprise as well. EY in particular has got really, really deep roots into the UK civil service. And in many ways is kind of indistinguishable and interchangeable with it. That's the level that we're talking about, and there's a revolving door of people going back and forth between EY and central government and back again, and the same is true for all of these big consulting firms. Right? This is really the swamp that we're looking at here, and it touches into academia. So there's a fellow called Lord Hastings, who's the chair of SOAS, the School of Oriental and African Studies. I think that's correct. Which is a real hotbed for all of these neo-Marxist theories that are being used to try and shape and reshape Western culture at the moment. So I think his attendance to this is really quite intriguing. And then there's another gentleman called Dr. Jeremy Silver, who's part of an organisation called Digital Catapult. And this is where we start to venture away from the kind of more traditional industry and more traditional institutional types that we've just been talking about. And you begin to get into what I call the digital industrial complex, and how these new technologies are being promoted across all industries, all parts of society. And organisations like Digital Catapult, who I've worked with previously, they're based up on Euston Road. It's a kind of government-backed innovation accelerator, and they work with cohorts of different organisations, different groups from industry. So they'll have banks in there, they'll have industrials businesses in there, they'll have a whole bunch of different types of private sector organisations come through to collaborate with Digital Catapult around a specific new technology that they're trying to get out into the market. And obviously all of that is positioned around UK PLC competitiveness and economic growth and equity and inclusion and all these great buzzwords. But I think that having looked at how this stuff is developing, the whole the motivation for it is certainly not that pure.
And I think, Ben, too, it's clearly what you're showing is a broad range of areas that representatives are coming from. So it's almost like Anthropy. And I know we're just discussing Anthropy at the moment, but Anthropy has pretty much all bases covered, because we've also got media represented with the CEO of Channel 4, Alex Mahon. And we've also got Kamal Ahmed, journalist, who is the co-founder of the News Movement. So we've got media, and we've also got the arts, as you said, the RSA, but we've also got Dame Darcy Bussell appearing, and we've got trusted messengers that many people will know, Jay Blades from The Repair Shop. And people will see familiar faces. I also was quite struck with the fact that Tony Juniper, CBE, was one of the speakers there. And he's the chair of Natural England. And many of our audience might remember that we've talked about Natural England, especially down here in the Southwest, where Natural England seemed to be asset seizing from farmers for rewilding purposes. So, we have a whole broad array of speakers in Cornwall, and you brought up, and I struggle to, I'm a Republican for the record, but I struggle to call Charles King. However, this is the Duchy of Cornwall. There are only two duchies in the UK, the Duchy of Lancaster who manages the King's purse and engagements, and the Duchy of Cornwall, which manage the Prince and Princess of Wales's public appearances and public purse. So we're talking about a royal duchy with the Eden project, quite appropriately. Well, I think the symbology goes without saying. And we're talking about a Cornwall, which is a very poor area. Homelessness is record high. And although people think that it's a holiday area and it's very affluent, it really isn't. So Anthropy, when you look at the FAQ, is clearly not targeted for Cornish people to attend. This event is clearly targeting international, global leaders. And the whole agenda, as you've rightly said, with this revolving door from going from one organisation to another, and they just seem to be rebranded with new woke names, perhaps. But this organisation really is targeting youngsters, isn't it? It's young leaders from all ethnic groups, from all diverse environments. And they're definitely not targeting the Cornish, are they? They're not asking us to go to the conference and listen. This is a far, far bigger agenda.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, this is not being run for the benefit of the public. I think that's fair to say. I mean, it's very expensive to attend for a start. So I think the tickets are around £1,000. So, you know, deeply prohibitive to the vast majority of the population, and it's being run for global corp, basically, and people who are going to enable that. And you know, there's a whole section in here about our healthy futures and how we've got to improve our health, and who's sponsoring it. Oh well, it's Novartis, one of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies. It's Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, which is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. These are the same names that we've seen cropping up again and again over the past few years. And here they are again at Anthropy talking about the future of Britain.
I mean, like you've said, Ben, there's an awful lot to talk about, and we're just skimming over the surface, and we're hoping that we're giving some signposts to our audience to go and look for themselves in depth. And perhaps if maybe one of you listening out there fancies attending, fancies writing your biography and submitting your data and having to tick boxes to say that you've consent and read the privacy terms, then it would be great to hear from you. But Ben, let's just go from Anthropy onto your next discovery, which is CogX. Can you tell us a bit about CogX?
Yeah, sure. So similar model, but a bit more industry focused, and with a bit of a wider audience. So CogX is coming up in September, and I am actually going to attend this. They offered me a free networking ticket, so I'm going to go and stick my head into the Excel Centre and see what's going on up there, although it is fairly clear what they're all about. And like I said, this is what I call the digital industrial complex. And I spoke about Digital Catapult a moment ago. Well, they're also represented at CogX, and there's lots of these types of organisations around. Like also Nesta is another one, NESTA, who kind of play this role of essentially operating like think tanks and innovation accelerators, helping to promote these new technologies and get them out into society. And again, all presented in this kind of benevolent way. And CogX last year, I'm not sure exactly how long it's been running for, but last year, interestingly, there was one session that they ran, which I did a little live stream on a couple of months ago, which was called the New World Health Order. Make of that what you will. And on the stage, they had Chris Wigley, who's the CEO of Genomics England. I've talked about quite extensively. And for me, genomics is eugenics. Right? It's basically precision engineering of the human genome based on, whatever it is that these people want humanity to be. It's really quite terrifying when you dig into it. So he was speaking. They had a guy from Microsoft speaking, some people from the NHS and other places in the health system. And essentially the vision that they sketched out for healthcare was digitized, artificially intelligence-driven completely universal integrated data platforms. And one of the things that really jumped out at me from that session that they ran last year was this idea that if the 20th century was the century of the clinician, then the 21st century was going to be the century of the system. And that means the technology, that means the algorithms, right? So that's what they're promoting. And it's exactly the same this year. It's basically this mindset that the answer is AI. I don't care what the question is. We're going to push this into every part of society, whether it's a good idea or not. Lots of people from all of the classic categories that you would expect. So lots of talk about things like fake meat, lots of talk about what is essentially amounts to censorship. Lots of discussion about the climate crisis and how all this technology is going to somehow algorithmically solve it for us. And leading out the conversation for the entire event is Yuval Noah Harari. So the big show-stopping headline speaker for CogX in 2023, in spite of everything that we know about the World Economic Forum at this point, is still putting forward Yuval Noah Harari, the historian and philosopher, who is basically the big strategic thinker behind all of these World Economic Forum policies, the man who's basically loving this idea that humans are now hackable animals that can be known and understood and quantified and controlled. And has basically been laying the groundwork for everything that the World Economic Forum has been promoting, laying the groundwork for everything that they're going to be talking about, anthropy, which we just talked about a moment ago. And basically that to me, just alone, his presence at the top of the page sets the tone for the rest of the conference and how to understand everything that goes beyond it, right? So, all of the other attendees from that point onwards, all the other speakers, should I say, from that point onwards, I have to look at in a particular light. And when you see that they have Alex Younger, who's former head of MI6, I think that puts a very particular spin on it as well. You have a guy called Dan Van Weel, who is Assistant Secretary General at NATO. So these are heavy military industrial complex type people. You have Elan Gur, who is the CEO of ARIA. And we could have another really long conversation about ARIA, which was launched last year to be the DARPA of the United Kingdom. And Elan Gur is basically responsible for dishing out £800 million worth of taxpayer money to companies that he thinks are going to be extraordinarily disruptive to human existence, right? And all of that is positioned in this science and technology paradigm. Everything's about science and technology and artificial intelligence, right? There's no reference at any point really to humanity or art or any of the those things. It's all very one-dimensional. The way that these people talk and the things that they invest in. Huge representation from Meta. So there's a guy called Dex Hunter Torek, who is an advisor to the Meta Oversight Board. If you remember a few years ago, I think it was in the wake of the 2016 election, there was an oversight board introduced at Meta, and people like Alan Rusbridger from The Guardian were put in position as the kind of adults in the room to make sure that Facebook, now called Meta, were behaving properly and they weren't allowing naughty people to say awful things on their platform. Again, just essentially a globalist right-think censorship operation funded by one of the world's biggest technology companies. Obviously, we need to put them on stage. There is the technology editor from Wired magazine, a guy called Amit Katwala. Wired is a really interesting one. They're owned by Condé Nast, and I've actually worked right up to the global board level at Condé Nast for their former global chief executive. So before I realised what on earth was going on, let's just put it like that. And Condé Nast are another World Economic Forum partner. So Wired magazine are there representing WEF interests essentially, And Condé Nast, as an aside, also owned Vogue, GQ, a whole bunch of other big mainstream media titles. So I think that puts them into question as well, although they aren't attending CogX. Yeah, this is Wired magazine, which is basically a cheerleader for big tech. You know, they are. It's a consumer technology magazine. It's a bit, like I think there was one called Stuff Mag as well a couple of years ago. It's basically new widgets and gadgets that people can buy, and that basically amounts to stimulating the consumer demand and the market for all of these what would actually turn out to be quite nefarious control systems. When you understand them in their totality. Who else is in here? IBM, Jenny Taylor, MBE from IBM. IBM, who issued, Debbie, you shared this with me, this remarkable report, basically talking about the absolute desperate need to retrain, what was it, 40% of the workforce globally into becoming AI workers. Was that right?
Yeah, it was. It was retraining 40% in new skills to cope with AI. I mean, and I believe that IBM are in, I shouldn't say cahoots, they're in collaboration with Microsoft to do this as well, I believe. And I found it quite shocking. And from what I'm hearing from you today, it almost seems, I mean, we are an island nation, right? And it seems that we've become encircled by different organizations. So it's almost like, and I know that we've discussed this on the phone, that lots of people know a little of the information, but nobody knows it all. So things are being held in different places. And you've said so much there. It's like crazy to unpack it all, because you mentioned so many huge names: Harara, Nesta, Aria. And I think it's important that we just highlight that ARIA, the Advanced Research Invention Agency, which was only, it was only born very recently. And this was a Dominic Cummings brainchild. He was the one that put an advert in the paper, I think, to advertise for weirdos and eccentrics to bring their ideas. And then this would be his very own version, as you've said, of DARPA in the USA, although I see ARIA as more of a kind of replica, if you like, to BARDA, also in the USA, very much looking at innovative ways, new technology, startup funds. They have a huge budget, and they don't seem to mind, ARIA don't seem to mind wasting their budget if it's a project that fails. If it's an early project that at the last stage it fails, well, that's all part of the game. It's the British taxpayer that's lost their money. So, that, and then you've mentioned genomics as well, Genomics England. So there's just so much to unpack. But I do remember that when we were talking about CogX, you did mention something that I found very dark, and I know you did too. And forgive me if I'm incorrect here, but did I hear you mention an organization called Hugging Face? How does Hugging Face relate to CogX?
Remarkably sinister name, isn't it? But obviously, a hugging face is an emoji, and it's like a nice, friendly emoji, and that's the name of this thing. Very, 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 very digital. But the Hugging Face is represented by this guy called Thomas Wolfe, and he's actually number 2 on the speaker list behind Yuval Noah Harari. So he's clearly quite an important high-level person in all of this. Basically, there's this ecosystem that exists around artificial intelligence, and it's existed around all of the different technologies as they've emerged. Essentially, you have these organizations that are there to lightly challenge the narrative and to lightly challenge the corporations, and to raise the concerns, and to basically present a public message that these people are actually being tracked and monitored and held to account in some way. And Hugging Face is an organisation that feels a bit like that. There's a bundle of others. I don't want to chuck a load of new names into the mix now because, as you said, we've already introduced a load of people and a load of organisations. But Hugging Face strike me as being one of those. They talk a really good game about ethics, but actually they appear to be it's like a smokescreen for allowing these organisations behind the scenes to go ahead and do what they wanted to do anyway. Because this is a grim march, right? That they are that all these people are participating in. There's a grim inevitability to all of this. Yeah, the technology is being built. They're building more and faster. If you remember from the Tony Blair conference, Debbie, that was the message from them. And it's all about globalization, digitization, consolidation of industry, and total transformation of industry using these same technologies. And people like Hugging Face are just there to help usher that process along. And I'm going to write about them and a bunch of other people that I've come across over the coming weeks, because they're a really important part of this, actually.
Before we go on and explore a bit more, when you've said that you're going to write, and you do write, and you do put out an incredibly valuable resource, can you just, before we forget, tell people where they can find you? I mean, we will have the links in the article beneath this interview, but where can people find you and your writings?
You can find me in two places at the moment. The one where I'm going to be writing about the awful, nefarious things that are happening in the world that we've kind of been touching on here is riseuk.substack.com. And I've been going through the whole system, basically. So a lot of what's happening in healthcare, what's happening in the consulting industry, what's happening in the advertising industry I've been getting onto this week. Essentially calling out the corruption that is completely systemic. But that can get a little bit depressing. So I've also started a new project, which we did talk about last time, which is called Pattern. And you can find that at Pattern18, Pattern18 at substack.com. And that's where we are running a grassroots, citizen-led experiment to design and build the future of Britain away from all of these nefarious vultures and their digital platforms and their artificial intelligence. And we're going to do that in a way that's going to work for the whole of the population, not just the people with the AI, which is what we're looking at here.
I've definitely got some questions to ask you about AI, but from what I can see and from what I can hear from you, and if we take it back to the Tony Blair conference, and I so remember the Build Back Better being suddenly magically changed into Build More Faster. I remember those words. But I'm looking at the Tony Blair Future of Britain conference, which was clearly targeted towards the youngsters. And Anthropy, CogX, we're looking at high new technology that my generation, quite frankly, most of us, it's beyond us. So it's a young agenda. And I know that you're very keen to talk about Meti Coburn, because, we take that back to the Future of Britain, Tony Blair. There's also a Future of Britain Next Generation. And Meti Coburn is absolutely instrumental as almost Tony Blair's right-hand man. Because again, you've said the revolving door, and this is all the revolving door from one organisation to another. They're all interlinked. Tell us about Meti Coburn.
It is really fascinating, actually, how all this stuff stitches together. Let me just end on one more person who's going to be going to the CogX event and speaking at the CogX event, because I think that segues quite neatly into Meti Coburn, actually. So one of the other people, and fascinatingly, really, when you consider what COGX is and who it represents the interests of, right, which is global corporate. There's a fella called Aaron Bastani, who is a British Iranian fella, who is the chief executive of something called Novara Media, which is what described by them as a communist organization. So they are promoting hard left-wing political ideologies, and they are very much targeted at the younger generation. So really anyone below about the age of 35, 40 years old, that's who Novara Media are talking to. And I'll be honest with you, they're doing a pretty good job of it. I don't agree with anything that they have to say that I've seen thus far. But they're doing a really good job on YouTube and a really good job on Instagram of building this left-wing narrative that is completely aligned with what the globalists want to happen. You know, this centralization of power and this increased and continuously increasing role of the state in absolutely every aspect of life. And so he's been promoting that. And by the way, if that sounds confusing to you, like how can the communists be aligning themselves with the global corporations? Then I'd suggest going to find, and I'll put this somewhere, and maybe we could put some links to this, Debbie. There's a fantastic speech by a guy called James Lindsay, who runs an organisation called New Discourses, where he speaks for about half an hour to the European Parliament earlier on this year, basically describing how neo-Marxist doctrine has been adapted for the West. And as part of that process, they have essentially given themselves permission to go and talk to the corporations, because actually this is the way for them to deliver their communist vision for reality. And effectively, they've constructed a scenario where it's okay for them to go and work with the corporations because they have the best the best interests of humanity at heart, because they're the nice, well-intentioned ones, even though they're promoting these hard left-wing ideologies that are just as bad as the hard right-wing ideologies. They essentially end up at the same place. It's all just tyrannical authoritarianism, which I think might neatly lead me into Mehdi Koban, who is, as we spoke about last time, a Labour politician. He's on Hackney Council. He's particularly involved in all of this climate change stuff and promoting the ULEZ agenda. As well as that, he runs an organisation called My Life, My Say, and that's been running for a good few years now, and it's part of the reason that he was given an MBE. So this guy is very much British establishment, just like all the other people that we were talking about earlier. And if you go to the My Life, My Say website, and this is all about getting the younger generation into politics, which, on the surface of it is a good thing. But then you look at how they've been operating and all the language around it, and you realise that it's actually not about getting them into politics. It's about getting them into politics in a very with a very specific intent, which is to drag the country into these hard left-wing ideologies and to promote those as the only route forward for the country, and to have that younger generation completely indoctrinated in this stuff. And Blair is absolutely front and center in the frame of how this thing has been run. So if you go to the website, there are a bunch of videos that run as soon as you get onto the homepage, which is Mehdi Koban and Tony Blair on stage, not at a Tony Blair event this time, but at a My Life, My Say event. So the roles have switched a little bit, but Blair is absolutely there. He's the power behind the throne. He's guiding the conversation. There's, they're not hiding it. They're not making any bones about the fact that you have a partisan political leader, former prime minister of this country, war criminal, all the other things that he's done that I won't list off now. helping shape the narrative and the direction of this organisation. And who else is helping shape the narrative and direction of the organisation? Well, if you look at the partners list, yeah, so these are the partners that Mehdi Koban has selected to work with his organisation. Well, you have the United States Embassy in London. Well, that's just remarkable. Why is the US? Why are you working with the US Embassy? Very odd. The Mayor of London. I suppose we should expect that from Sadiq Khan. Something called the Berg-Rubin Institute, which is an LA-based think tank. So there's a lot of billionaire philanthropist, international money floating around this organisation. And then another fascinating one, which was this organisation called Plexel. Now, Plexel was an innovation lab, and it's located somewhere called Here East, which is part of the legacy of the London 2012 Olympic Games. It's actually on the old Olympic site in East London, right over the other side of the canal from Hackney Wick. And Plexel's been there for about a decade. And they're another one of these organizations, a bit like Digital Catapult, right, that is a interaction point between international corporations and central government with emergent technologies in the startup community. And I don't understand why Plexel would be partnering with an organization that is designed to get young people involved in politics. I just don't see any crossover there at all, apart from the fact that the chairman of My Life, My Say, which is Mehdi Koban's organization. Mehdi Koban is the chief executive, the founder. The chairman of that organization is a guy called Andrew Ruffin, who is also the chairman of Plexel. So this fellow Ruffin is, I think, extraordinarily important and interesting in this mix, because he sits across this drive to indoctrinate young people into hard left-wing political ideologies and a very specific and particular worldview being driven by the likes of Tony Blair and Sadiq Khan and all these other people, as well as overseeing a huge amount of private sector innovation activity going on in Plexel, but probably more importantly, given what we've been talking about, a whole load of public-private partnership activity that's also going on there as well. So they'll work with central government departments on things like cybersecurity, artificial intelligence. All of the technologies that we've been talking about are being developed and deployed in Plexel for central government. And interestingly, they're also, because this was on his LinkedIn profile, he's been talking about this publicly, they're working currently with Barclays Bank, whose CEO recently resigned, as members will probably remember, because of his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. But that's another very long conversation that Debbie and I are not going to have right now. Just thought I'd throw it in there. And Barclays picked up a contract to run a UK government innovation scheme in a very odd kind of stitch up at the end of last year. It'd been run by an organization called Tech Nation for a long time. And somehow Barclays won this contract, even though it's a bank and potentially therefore a competitor to a lot of the companies that were going to be participating in the program. And they're now dishing out government money into the economic system as well, and they're doing it in partnership with Plexel. So there's this really sinister, deeply questionable little cabal here, I think, that have got their fingers into a whole load of government money, a whole load of deep technology, a whole load of what the corporations are up to, and are really actively trying to manipulate the social structure and the political situation in order to enable the things that they're doing. And I think that this has to be examined much more closely and called out, because I think it's deeply, deeply concerning to me. What Blair, what Ruffin, what Coban, what all these other people are up to.
Well, I'm, for one, very grateful to you for doing all of this research, because we rely on people like you and our audience to do the research, to join the dots, to see where the connections are. And clearly, we're looking at organizations of circles within circles, but it's right on our doorsteps. It's right literally on my doorstep. And I think people need to be aware that this is going on probably in their neighborhood. There's somebody somewhere that's attending one of these organizations representing their views, but you haven't been consulted. Ben, is there, because there's a couple of generalized questions that I'd like to ask you with regards to AI on a more positive note. Is there anybody else that you want to specifically mention that you've noted during your research before I move on to that? Or do you think probably we've got quite enough names to be going on with, and a lot of research, a lot of dots to join?
No, I don't think I have any more individuals. I mean, the main ones, like, if I might just reiterate, actually, the ones that we have mentioned, I think they might be useful for people just to kind of sum up. I think the main names to take away are the British establishment names attending Anthropy, who, for my money, are acting on behalf of the royal family. So that would be Lord Deben, aka Lord Gummer, Dame Julia Cleverdon, Andy Haldane, Dame Julia Slingo. I think those people are particularly interesting in the context of what we're talking about, and given what we know about Charles's relationship with Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. There's a whole bundle of people at CogX that people should go and have a look at and understand what they're doing and what they're about. I'm particularly interested in, and I would particularly like to draw attention again to this fella Aaron Bastani, because for my money, he's actually one of the most significant people in British politics and British media at the moment, who is attending that event, and he is part of this hard left-wing axis, which is very well evidenced and embodied by Mehdi Coban. I'm sure that they know each other. The message is exactly the same. The target audience is exactly the same. And Blair and Andrew Ruffin. And this whole thing is deeply concerning and needs to be looked into. So those are the names that I would just bring to the surface again at the end here to wrap that up.
No, I think that's really helpful to sum that up. And I'd also like to say that when I started looking into things, I found another conference on the 10th of December at Plexel, London. This is Plexel again, and it's called Future of Britain Next Generation. And I found Sir Ed Davies' name in that. So here we have the leader of the Liberal Democrats. So what you said about a uni party and what others have said about a uni party clearly is what's happening. But what I'm seeing is an agenda to target our young, but in particular, so just generalizing, because I know that I don't want to keep our audience and listeners listening for too long, because there's so much information and I think sometimes we can get overwhelmed. So very quickly, I just want to ask you a couple of questions about AI, because being a nurse, having trained in the NHS, I'm seeing an artificial intelligence medical revolution taking place, where they're saying that AI is going to design and make new drugs. We're going to see doctors and nurses training in the metaverse in fact, spending a lot of time in the metaverse. And we can see that this is the organizations that we've highlighted today. How do we create a new paradigm, Ben? Because many of us don't want to live under this dictatorship, this tyranny. We want to release ourselves from the politics, the grid, the control. How do we rebuild a system outside this system? Or do you think really that, because we're coming up to winter, we're already hearing stories of new COVID variants, questionable whether we're going to wear masks, questionable whether there are going to be more lockdowns. Can this really happen again? Are people going to buy into this again? Or what can we do to create a new paradigm?
Very good question. And quite a complicated one. But the main thing that we can do is to not comply, to rebel, and rebel against the narrative around these new COVID variants. It smacks of total desperation that they're trying to bring this back again. I think that more and more of the population are fully aware, at least, that something wasn't right about the way that was handled last time. So the idea that they can basically have another run through the same process, it just seems they're running out of ideas, basically. I think that we have got to, as a people, as individuals, as communities, as society as a whole, we've got to get better at having difficult conversations and not allowing those to become escalated and heated as far as possible. Yeah, these are obviously challenging topics, and a lot of people have been very heavily propagandized and indoctrinated. And actually, if viewers have not yet listened to Brian Gerish's interview with James Delingpole, you should do. It's excellent. Made me really proud to be working with UK Column, actually, listening to the interview and hearing about the background of the organisation. And one of the things that Brian talks about in that is the fact that the government have been using neuro-linguistic programming on the population for a number of years now, and they're well aware that is actually potentially really dangerous and could be used to escalate things into extreme violence if they want to. We've got to be cognizant of that, right? Like, the information environment is not benign. It's being manipulated in a way that's designed to create conflict, and you can see this happening all over the place. So the main thing is to absolutely not allow yourself to be caught up in that and triggered by it. And when you understand that most things out there that we're being talked to about, whether, across the piece, right, really in any part of the conversation that's put out into the mainstream media, is designed to wind you up, then it becomes a bit easier to not allow it to, and to laugh at it, actually, to laugh in the face of it, because it's deeply manipulative and needs to be understood like that. And in terms of building new systems, I think the most important thing to understand, and here in 2023, and particularly as someone who's kind of grown up with devices, although less not quite to the extent that the youngers have these days. You've got your sort of 20, 25-year-olds who have basically been on the internet since they were born. They aren't really capable of understanding a world where that might not exist, but we actually got quite a long way as a human civilization, and in many ways things were exponentially better before the internet came along and before all of these devices came along, and we were perfectly capable of sustaining 40-50 million people in this country plus before the internet arrived. So there are old traditional systems, approaches that need to be examined, re-examined, had the dust blown off them, and updated a little bit potentially. But I think a lot of the stuff that got us to where we are today, in centuries past, is been purposefully discarded, and we need to bring those things back out again. Whether it's traditional ways of producing food, traditional ways of of building cities or whatever it might be. You know, there's plenty in our past that should be re-examined and put to the forefront again. But we can also, you know, I'm not a Luddite, and I'm not suggesting, you know, we go back to the Stone Age by any stretch of the imagination, and we can build parallel tech-enabled systems that are extremely advanced and that build on the best of what's available to us today, but aren't created by global corporations and under the specifications of uh, global state type actors like the World Economic Forum or the World Health Organization, that will do a better job of the good things that those technologies can do, and without all of the manipulative and the bad things lumped into them as well. And you know, I'm got a very active interest in this. I spent a long time working in what Klaus Schwab describes as the fourth industrial revolution. So all of these different advanced technologies like mobile handsets, digital applications, artificial intelligence, machine learning, blockchain, 3D printing, like all of these things, that has been the backdrop to my career. I've worked with big corporations to think about ways to benefit from these technologies and to deploy them into their businesses to create new markets. And there is a way of doing this work well, and we're going to be applying that way of working at pattern18.substack.com. That's what I talked about earlier. And our game is basically the antidote to globalism, which is what I call localism, and building systems that are focused on improving the lives of the whole of humanity, not just the tiny few who are in control of the system today.
And that's so incredibly positive. And I can't think of a better note, really, to wrap up today, other than to say I'm delighted that you mentioned Brian's interview with James Dellingpole. And I think it would be good for you, for maybe for Brian and you to have a chat, because of the remarkable links to Common Purpose and all of his work on Common Purpose, which he started with. So I think that would be fantastic. And I also see COVID as being a destabilization exercise, really, for what's to come, and the crisis in inverted commas and the acceleration in inverted commas. You know, clearly it's not working. It's just not working. Did the crisis work? Did we see through it? Yes, we did see through it, and we're still here to tell the tale. You know, we're seeing what's going on. We're opening our eyes and we're joining the dots. And it's thanks to people like you and to our audience. And there are going to be many, you know, that are watching that might have information regarding some of the people that you've been highlighting today, or maybe have attended the events, or maybe their children have attended their events. So we would really welcome any contact with anybody that knows anything about any of the organisations that Ben has talked about today. I personally think they're panicking. They're trying to rebrand, throw us off the scent a little bit. That's what I think. So I think this is very positive. But as always, Ben, I'm going to leave you with the last word. And I cannot thank you enough, because this is just one of many conversations that Ben and I have. And Ben spends hours and hours and hours doing his research and making sure that he's absolutely on top of what he's saying. So thank you so much, Ben. I'm going to leave it with you and to say the digital industrial complex, which is the title of this chat with Ben, really sums everything up. So Ben, it's over to you for the last word. God bless you, and thank you so much.
So the final message this time is actually to the people who are going to these events, shaping, leading, and attempting to execute this plan. My message to you is you have already failed. I know your organizations. I know the people that work in them. I know your culture. I know your capability. and you haven't got what it takes. Whatever they're telling you is a lie. Whatever future they're trying to project us into with your help, we do not want, and you and your organizations are not capable of making a reality. So my suggestion is that you stop.